Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Spark Your Health Talk, Built to Move with Dr. Kelly Starrett and Juliet Starrett. My name is Katira Noviello Kapoor, and I'm the Senior Director of Health Promotion, Wellness, and Athletics at the 92nd Street Y. This evening, we look forward to taking a thorough look at some essential movements we can weave into our lives to set us up for moving more seamlessly, with less pain, and that can create long-term positive results leading to living more fully. We hope you will also be able to join us for upcoming Spark Your Health talks. On May 3rd, next week already, I have Aisha Tahir joining us on site at 92NY for a postural awareness and correction workshop. And if you joined us for Aisha's virtual talk earlier this month, you learned that proper posture can support our confidence and longevity. May 24th, we welcome Nancy Collier back to 92NY for a virtual workshop on rediscovering your independence within a relationship. We will leave 15 minutes at the end of our program for questions, which will be collected from the chat. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the duration of the program. I may from time to time ask Kelly and Juliet relevant questions during the event as well. I am now pleased to introduce our esteemed guests this evening, Dr. Kelly Starrett and Juliet Starrett. Both Kelly and Juliet Starrett are the co-founders of the Ready State, former co-founders of San Francisco CrossFit, and co-authors of the Wall Street Journal bestseller Deskbound. Juliet Starrett is also the CEO of the Ready State and was a professional whitewater paddler, winning 3 world championships and 5 national titles. Kelly Starrett is the co-author of the New York Times bestsellers Becoming a Supple Leopard, Ready to Run, and he consults with athletes and coaches from the NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB, the U.S. Olympic team, Elite Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Coast Guard forces. And I will bring them up on the screen right now. And hi, Kelly and Juliet. Welcome to the Spark Your Health virtual stage. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Great to be here.
We are excited to be here.
We were just in New York last week. Was that last week?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. It was beautiful. We caught the peak spring, and we are thrilled to be with you now. What we want to try to do is sort of lay out the context of this book. So we've just written this book, Built to Move. And what we're trying to do here is sort of distill 20 plus years of working in austere, complicated, high pressure, high performance environments. And oftentimes what we've tried to do is say, we've treated high performance sports and high performance environments as a living laboratory. We could really come to understand what was essential, what moved the needle, how did we keep people feeling good, coming through their sports, coming through their jobs, and returning to their families intact. But what we've noticed also in the last 10 years particularly, and with this sort of onset of social media and the craziness of bombardment of messages and conflicting advice we're getting in health and wellness, that potentially the message of transferring what we've learned in high performance environments back to actually our families and our communities hasn't gone very well.
And what I would add, one of the lenses through which we wrote this book is that there was this part of our life where we were working with a lot of high performing athletes, but simultaneously we're busy working parents of 2 teenage daughters. And, contrary to popular belief, we actually don't spend most of our time exercising and preparing our meals.
I write in my gratitude journal for 2 hours every morning.
Our lives look very much like every other busy parent where we're getting our kids out the door in the morning and we're spending the vast majority of our day in front of a computer. And then we come home and we're doing sports practices and cooking dinner. And what we found in this life is that we, like everybody else, were struggling to figure out which health habits we could reasonably do and not get sucked into the shiny objects that we see in the health and fitness business. And so what we tried to do in this book was create a comprehensive set of objective measures. And they're all practices that we actually do in our own lives that we feel like move the levers for us the most as individuals from a health standpoint, but they're also the same behaviors that we recommend to our high performers as the basis for high performance.
So you'll notice that Juliet and I are we love the idea of durability versus sort of this greater concept of longevity. And longevity is great. We're into it. We're into being 120 years old. That sounds really great. But the realities are that we feel like if we can focus on our durability in the short term, what we end up is having a body that's capable and a brain that's capable of doing the things we want to do for as long as we want. So we're not really interested in being 100 years old and not being able to use our bodies. We want to mountain bike and race and steal cars when we're 100. We really want to make sure that we understand that the decisions we're making today in small behaviors, not the 1 hour class where we've sort of commoditized and fetishized fitness, but throughout the course of a day, can all aggregate into making real and significant changes in how we feel and the movement choices that we have day to day. And so if we can, what we'll try to do here is give you a glimpse of our systems approach. And now, again, one of the things we focus on here was saying, what are the small hinges that open the biggest doors? And as Juliet hinted at, if you're an athlete and fancy yourself sort of a high performer, if you come to us for saying, hey, I need to win another world championship, I want to win another gold medal, we're going to make sure that we cover these bases. So we're going to talk about the fact that this book sort of divides into two categories. The first category of vital signs, as Juliet mentioned, are objective measures that allow us to really understand some of the key metrics of our health in terms of walking, sleep, making sure that we're getting enough sort of the right micronutrients and macronutrients on board. We've sort of created some really clear objective ways to understand, and not sort of the pleasantries of like eat more fruits and vegetables, but specifically, here's how we're going to measure these things. And the second half of the book is really a glimpse into movement vital signs, helping us understand movement minimums. And I think one of the things that we've failed at generally is that if we look at the metrics, third-party validation of wealth and of health and wellness, what we understand is that we're seeing greater rates of obesity, greater rates of diabetes, low back pain, surgeries, ACL injury rates, substance abuse, depression. It turns out that our experiment that we've been running for over a decade in a sort of high commodity, high fancy sports and fitness hasn't really served our families very well. So what we intend to do tonight is give you a glimpse of our systems approach thinking so that you can begin to be curious about some of these aspects and become the node. We have come to believe that the household, that the individual is really the unit of change. And that if we can get away from this idea that, hey, I have to go somewhere and exercise for an hour, that's how I'm going to have health. And we can expand that definition into, hey, how do I think about these essential behaviors from the moment I wake up until I go to bed? And how do those things interact? We can see that we can make big changes. Specifically, if you think you're working at the limits of your ability, you're not. You probably can feel a little bit better at the end of the week. You probably can have more energy. And the same things that we're working towards on helping our athletes reduce their session cost, the cost of high performance environment, high performance sport, so they can feel better at the end of the week, we can apply those same lessons.
So before we start doing some demonstrations, I want to just take a minute to define the word mobility. Those of you who've gone to a gym may have heard it, but what we found is that there's a lot of confusion about what that word actually means. And so we're just going to draw a line in the sand and say, to us, mobility is the ability to move your body freely without pain and be able to do the things you want to do with your body. And before we get into the demonstrations, one of the ways I want you to think about this movement piece of our book, which is sort of half of the vital signs in our book are related to movement, is that we have a friend who's a financial advisor and consults with people on saving for retirement and working on their 401ks. And he found that actually everybody who comes in to talk with him and consult with him doesn't want to talk about money. They instead want to talk with him about the things they want to be able to do with their bodies when they're retired. Travel, play with their grandkids, garden, be able to be physically active. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to do with this book is basically create this 401k for your body. So these are the things that we believe that, if you do some care and feeding of your body in the form of these vital signs in this book, that you are going to have mobility, move freely, and be able to do the things you want to do with your body.
The first thing we're going to ask you to do is, if you're at home or wherever you are, is to begin by sitting on the floor. So we're going to get right into it. Now, one of the reasons we're fans of this is that we're going to have to get up and down off the ground, which leads us to our first task. Now, I want to be clear that one of the reasons that we feel that this is such an important skill of moving up and down independently is it's the number one reason that people end up in nursing homes or skilled cares. They can't move independently. So again, if we were going to set out a set of parameters. Hey, on this day, I'm going to run the New York Marathon. I would work backwards the number of days I have, and I would have that number of days to train. Well, we're going to do that same thing. I want to maintain this skill forever, so I better start working on this skill today. So notice that we're both in two different positions. So come and join us, sit on the ground. And what I want to give you permission for, first and foremost, is that at any time during this talk and you're sitting on the ground, feel free to change positions. Feel free to fidget, feel free to move. There's no wrong way to sit on the ground. But the reason we're sitting on the ground is it's one of the first behaviors we can engage with that doesn't ask us for another bit of willpower. Most of us are watching a little bit of TV in the evening. And what we're going to propose tonight is that after this talk and during your TV session, that you actually try to spend 30 minutes a night sitting on the ground. The first part. Now notice we've got some cute mid-century modern couches behind us, and certainly you could do that by sitting on the couch in this same way. But what we're saying beginning is, if we can begin to get you sitting on the ground, we can begin a real conversation around sort of highlighting what's so important about the principles underlying this book. And number one is exposure. What ends up happening often is that as modern people, we find ourselves in environments that don't ask us to express full range of motion or to readily take our joints and tissues to a specific end range. We actually have a very small movement language, a small movement lexicon. And one of the things we know is that sitting on the ground is a really powerful way to start to return your hip range of motion. And you can start to have sort of rewild your native range. And you can do it while you're doing something else, which is really sort of one of the key central tenets of this book. One of the things we realized is that if we gave busy human beings another list of ways to optimize their lives, what we got was blank stares or incredulous looks. And instead, what we really appreciate is that there are probably going to be some moments and some agency in your life where you have some control, and those tend to be at the bookends of your day. So this first bookend of the day is in the evening, we want you to sit on the ground, but we're going to introduce a test to you. So from this ground seating position,
Start standing, I think.
let me start from sitting on the ground since we're here.
Okay.
Is all we're going to do, most people can do it lowering down, is all we're going to do is see if we can stand up from this crisscross applesauce position without putting a hand down or without using a knee down. Now, Juliet and we're pretty good at this. Notice though that you don't need full range of motion in your ankles to do this. You don't need full range of motion in your knees or your hips. But this is a nice indicator, it turns out, of all-cause mortality and all-cause morbidity, because ultimately what we're looking at is how effortlessly you can move through your environment, and expressing normative hip range of motion is a pretty good way to do that. So all we're going to do is we're going to lean forward, all right, and then we're just going to stand up from this position. If you need to put a hand down on the ground, you can. We can now reverse the process. Again, can I lower myself to the ground without putting my hands down or my knee down? Now, if you need something, a hand, you need a chair, that's absolutely okay. Because as we said, the first order of business is exposure. So one of the great behaviors that's been weaved into sitting on the ground in front of your television tonight and every night going forward for the rest of your life is that we can get you to practice this movement, which you may not do in the morning, you may not have cause for during the course of your day, and you definitely don't want to do it at work.
Well, so just to reiterate, this is called the sit and rise test, and we opened our book with it because we feel like it gives you some really quick and easy information about your hip mobility, which may not be something you ever cared about until this moment. But it turns out it can really have a big impact on how you feel in your body, how you're able to move through your environment, and maybe even some things like back pain. And, the simple test is to actually just lower yourself on the ground like you saw us do, and then stand back up without putting a knee down or a hand down. But if this is your first time doing it, we recommend that you do it near a couch or near a wall. Or if you're really nervous about falling backwards, you can actually just sit back onto a coffee table or a chair as your opening go. So we want you to do this safely the first time you try it. But the goal really is to get up and down without putting a knee or hand down.
Now, keep in mind that this is independent of age, that we regularly see when we travel across the globe. We see that people that toilet on the ground, sleep on the ground, work on the ground have no problem getting up and down. So don't think, hey, I'm excused from this. In fact, those of us who are over 50, we understand that we need to keep an eye on our range of motion. And so one of the central tenets of the idea of Built to Move is that what are the components to our bodies that allow us to have good expression of our movement during the day? And hopefully, how can we feel better doing that? And so when we said we divided this book into two categories, we almost can think about those first categories, like walking, sleeping, et cetera, which we'll talk about, ultimately feed into the health and readiness of my tissues to be able to do this. Not only is this good for the goose and good for the gander, but you should turn around and say, hey, there's a child over here. Let me see if this kindergarten can do it. And they can. And what we're trying to do here by creating a set of vital signs is that this allows us to suddenly, quickly have some health metrics that we can easily measure and that we can come back to. If you ride the bike a ton, you run a marathon, you jump in a red eye, and then all of a sudden you try to get up off the ground and you might find that your hips are a little bit stiff. And that hip stiffness may have hidden itself until you ran into a problem with your hip and suddenly realized, holy moly, I haven't been paying attention to it.
You know, one of the ways we like to think about our movement choice is everybody wants to have a wide hallway of movement, being able to do whatever you want. We sort of love this hallway analogy. But what we don't want as we get older and older is for our hallway to continue to narrow. And there's a lot of things that can contribute to a narrowing hallway, but one of those is your range of motion. And it's often the thing that people pay the least attention to. And that's one of the reasons why we love the sit and rise test so much, because it is a really quick and simple piece of information that anyone can do anywhere in your living room. And what we love about it is the way to improve is simply by doing something you're already doing, which is watching TV. You can just practice sitting on the floor and trying these different positions. Like, you know, I often sit 90-90 like this. You can long sit with your legs forward, one leg up. But what you'll find if you sit on the floor, especially if it's something that you haven't done regularly, is that you naturally are going to change positions, because most of us don't sit on the floor often enough in a crisscross applesauce position. So Kelly's here kneeling. We will often sit in a crisscross or cross-legged position. But what you'll find is you'll naturally be moving your hip through a variety of ranges of motion. And it turns out that you really actually can improve at this test. We've seen people really struggle at the beginning and spend time sitting on the floor, and you really can't actually improve and get to the point where you can get up and down without putting a hand or a knee down.
And I just want to point out that Juliet has had a hip replacement and I've had a total knee replacement because we had some trauma as athletes, and we're still able to engage in these tests. Now, one of the reasons that we want to put this here is it also sets up this framework about how all these behaviors integrate. So I'm a physical therapist by training, and if you come to me, one of the things that we're going to talk about is your hip range of motion if you show up with back pain or knee pain. And again, this is one of those features that a lot of people think, hey, this hip and my ability to sit on the ground, are they even related to the fact that my back is achy? So one of the ways that we can begin to restore the functionality of the system is by engaging in behaviors that ask me to express the system normally. So by having this range of motion, by encouraging that rotation, by having my legs out in front of me, what I can begin to do is have some normalizing inputs into how my hips function. And when we see the hip function better with the pelvis, lo and behold, we often see spontaneous changes in how people experience their back. And that what you'll see then is that what we've done is said, hey, here are some vital signs around specific body parts, but ultimately we reflect all the things that a human being should be able to do with her shoulders and all the things a human being should be able to do with her hips in this book.
So I think what we want to do now is just take a few minutes to talk about walking, because it's a chapter in this book and something that we're both really passionate about and obsessed with, and then we'll move on to another demonstration. What we recommend, one of the vital signs in this book, is getting enough movement in your day. And we believe the best way to do that is walking. Now, we owned a commercial gym for 16 years. It was a CrossFit gym. And what we saw was that people would often come to our gym and, you know, really do something heroic, which is showing up for any fitness class for a whole hour of your day. Like, everybody should feel heroic if they pull that off in their day. Many of you probably do because you're on this call. But what we saw was that many of our gym members were showing up for that 1 hour of a workout and then spending the vast majority of the rest of their waking hours sitting. And turns out that they just plain weren't getting enough total movement. And what we've learned over the years is that walking is a form of non-exercise activity. It's technically called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. People also call it NEAT. And the NEAT are all the ways that you move throughout your day that are apart from formal exercise. So cooking, walking, cleaning your house, gardening, even just fidgeting at your desk also counts as non-exercise activity. But what is starting to show up in the research is that there's a belief now that people who struggle to control their weight in their life versus people who do not, the people who do not are the people who get the most non-exercise activity throughout their day. And so that's independent of exercise. And so we've really come to believe that walking is this essential part of being a human, and that we really have sold people the wrong message in the health and fitness business, telling them that if they just check the box of exercise and then don't move for the remainder of the day, that they've sort of checked the box of health. And so there are a variety of other reasons that we love walking. I'll let Kelly take some examples.
How many steps and why do we choose that many steps?
So we chose 8,000 to 12,000 steps. The average American gets between 3,000 and 4,000 steps a day, just kind of going about their average day. The research shows that all the benefits of walking in terms of longevity and in terms of reducing chronic disease as we age come at about 8,000 steps. So turns out that any more, of course, is better, but that you're going to get most of the benefits of walking at 8,000 steps, not 10,000 steps.
You can actually get 8,000 steps in a day. We find that if people are a little bit more intentional in their movement, they can easily hit that 8,000. That 10,000 is a number you can let go. However, there's a couple of reasons we oftentimes feel like our active populations forget about walking and some of the benefits, because we love to train and walking feels very low skill. First is that your lymphatic system is driven by muscle contraction. And if you've heard of your cardiorespiratory system, of course, that's what most of us are training. But your lymphatic system is the sewage system of the body. And subsequently, if I want to remove the garbage, then all the dead cells, the turnover of tissues, all the proteins that are coming out as a normal byproduct of metabolism, those things that are too large to go through my circulatory system actually go through the lymphatic system. So if you've ever been on an airplane and had your ankles swell up and you have little cankles when you get after a long cross-country flight, that's an idea of your sewage system actually backing up. That's what your drain is happening in your sink when you've got a clog. And the easiest way to manage that, believe it or not, is movement, that your body has bootstrapped these systems in. And so if you want to have a better adaptation response from your exercise, if you want to just manage and have healthier tissue quality, we've got to increase our total movement. If you have chronic pain, we need you to move more. If you're in you're recovering from surgery or injury, we need you to decongest those tissues, and particularly true if you're training very hard. We'll find that athletes who fail to move enough afterwards actually don't sort of consummate this whole adaptation response. The second reason I think that oftentimes people overlook this is its power to create something called sleep pressure. Now, we have the opportunity to work with a lot of different higher performance environments. And one of the ones that we worked with was an elite military group called Delta Force. And they oftentimes have warfighters who have disordered sleep, disrupted sleep, have a hard time falling asleep and hard time staying asleep. And it turns out their number one intervention for these people who are struggling to stay asleep and fall asleep is to increase their steps.
And this is a group of people who have access to all the fancy technology, every possible medication that you could have, anything that's fancy, any bell and whistle, they have access to it. And they prescribe more walking to help people sleep better.
So if you are struggling to fall asleep and you have a hard time sleeping with your sleep quality, immediately bump to 10,000, and then tomorrow go to 11,000, and then go to 12,000. We end up prescribing 12 to 15,000, and we find that that ends up being a really great magic number to help people fall asleep. So again, the key here is this objective idea. Now, Juliet and I woke up this morning in Dallas and jumped on an airplane and haven't moved very much today. We just haven't had a chance. We've been traveling, we've been teaching. And so one of the things we're going to do after dinner, though, is we're going to just get a little walk in. And the key here with all of these ideas is that we probably won't have a time to train today. And so instead of walking, sort of rubbing off the entire day or crossing it off, instead what we're going to say is, well, what can we control in the remaining hours that we have? And we know that after dinner, we can go for a quick 15-minute walk and sort of up our steps. But because we've controlled some other aspects of our life, the whole day has been about a physicality. It's allowed us to think in terms of, hey, what does a physical practice look like? Not, hey, I didn't get a chance to exercise, so it must be a failure.
Just to review really quickly, I mean, we really believe that walking is the key to lifelong weight control. It induces sleep pressure, clears out your lymphatic system so you recover from workouts and you're better ready for your next workout. And then I think the fourth thing that we haven't talked about yet that we think is so critical is that, you know, especially post-pandemic where we were all isolated and lonely and rates of depression and isolation went way up, that we find that walking is one of the best ways to connect with one another and with our friends and our community, especially apart from technology. So Kelly mentioned this little walk we do after dinner. It's about 20 minutes. We actually measured it at 1,750 steps. But possibly the best thing about it is it actually gives us a chance to talk and connect. We actually see our neighbors. So it sort of expands our community and, you know, reminds us that we're part of a greater community. And so, you know,
I may or may not be in a power struggle with our neighbor, Steve.
Yeah, Steve.
And I force myself to say hello to Steve all the time. Hey, Steve, how's it going? So Steve and I have a truce because we run into each other outside.
But I think what Kelly alluded to earlier, and this is true of all of the behaviors in this book, you know, again, we've mentioned this idea of the 1 hour training session not quite being enough. But the other thing we've realized is that often people get into a mentality that if they can't hit their 1 hour class and do something for a whole hour, they may as well throw in the towel and give it up. And what we've really suggested throughout this book with all of these habits is that every single one of these vital signs that we prescribe and the practices around it can be done in little 5 and 10-minute increments throughout the day. And one story that I like to tell is that when we were really time-stressed parents, our kids were little toddlers, and Kelly invented this workout called the 10-10-10 at 10. And it was 10 push-ups, 10 air squats, 10 sit-ups for 10 minutes at 10 p.m. And I think that was one of the first times we realized that, you know, while of course that wasn't a perfectly complete training session with a warm up and a cool down and a mobility session and cardio and weightlifting, you know, it was enough to just sort of keep him going. And that was really where we started realizing that there's so many places throughout our day that we can add in a little 5-minute, 2-minute, 10-minute interventions or health practices into our lives that really can make a huge difference. So most of the time when we're getting our 8,000 to 12,000 steps, we actually aren't doing that in a row. We're not setting out to go for an hour walk in addition to our training session. We're actually adding on walking meetings or walking to the corner to get coffee, picking up our groceries. We're doing it in these little teeny increments, which is a really important part of this book.
Okay, so one of the things that we get is that we're trying to evangelize you and deputize you to go into your families and grab them for walking, grab them for movement, grab them for sitting on the ground. Now what we're going to do is we're going to show you how these behaviors interact. Over the course of nearly 20 years of working with athletes, one of the things we found was that a little bit of soft tissue mobilization, a little bit of self-myofascial mobilization in the evening was a really good way for people to fall asleep. It induced sort of a parasympathetic relaxation drive, just like getting a little bit of massage before we went to bed. What we found is that if I gave people mobilizing homework, like, hey, I need you to address the stiffness in your tissue, and I need you to do it during the day or during your training, we didn't see it happen very often. But if we tacked it on to the end of the evening when no one had something going on, we saw our adherence go through the roof. So what I'm going to show you now is a really simple first aid kit where if something is ailing you, notice we're already sitting on the ground. So this is the perfect time to ask, how am I feeling? What's going on? So what we're going to do is we're going to combine this with a couple of things. We're going to show you a couple quick tests that you can perform. These are vital signs. But again, one of the things we want to show you is that how these systems all interact. So we talked a little bit about hip range of motion, how it can affect how your back feels and how your back functions. Well, the same thing is true for your shoulders. If we can improve how your shoulders move and return your native full range of motion, not Simone Biles super gymnast range of motion, but just basic range of motion to your shoulders, what we end up seeing is a better shoulder body head relationship. And neck pain often goes out the window. So we're going to show you a couple mobilizations you can perform. All you're going to need is a little lacrosse ball or a little ball. And we're just going to, again, we're just going to show you a couple ideas here around this. So
But can I say a
yeah,
couple things as well? The thing I'd like to say before we get into the actual mobilizations is we are also huge fans of peppering our environment, and the environment in our house that is the most peppered is actually our living room, where we have baskets of tools like this, like foam rollers, lacrosse balls, massage guns, you name it. We have them peppered all over our living room. So it makes it really easy for us to make the decision that while we're also spending 30 minutes on the ground watching Netflix or whatever we're doing at night, it's just right there. We have a basket of tools. It makes it really easy to make the right decision. And we can spend a little bit of time doing some care and feeding on our body in 10 minutes. And, one of the things I'd like to say is that, the human body is one of the most complex organisms in the universe. And what we often have people say to us is, well, I mean, my entire body hurts. Where do I begin? And our response to that is just begin somewhere where you feel stiff or sore.
Touch anywhere to begin.
Touch anywhere to begin. And then the next night you can move on to another part of your body. And turns out over a 7-day period, you're actually going to get a lot of input into your entire body if you just keep moving through things where you feel sore or stiff. And, the other thing I want to mention before we get into the demo is that, we always have advocated for 10 minutes a day. And while that may not seem like you can get a huge amount of input into your body in 10 minutes, if you think about that as compounding interest, over 7 days, that's 70 minutes of care and feeding of your body and your tissues, again, while you're watching TV at night, and you can, compound that over years, months and years. And it's really a lot of careful and work done on your body, but in 10-minute increments.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna show you a slightly different test than everyone is familiar with. We're gonna just have Juliet lay on her back. Go ahead and turn around, Jay, in this direction. And then she's just gonna put her arms out into just kind of a Y position. So I'll move out of the way here. So just got her arms out in this position. Now, most of us should be able to hit this position cold. We shouldn't have to warm up or activate or prime or prep. We should have access to our range of motion. One of the reasons we love focusing on range of motion is we know it unlocks so many hidden benefits, and it's one of those key features of your body that doesn't have to change as you age. Nowhere is it written that you have to necessarily lose your range of motion or your capacity to move freely as we age. It's something we sort of take as written in gospel. It's more difficult to hold on to muscle mass, difficult to win Olympic lifting records as you get older, but it's not difficult to maintain your range of motion. So what we have here is a simple test. And all I'm going to have Juliet do is drive the back of her hands into the ground as hard as we can. And you can probably do this too. So take a big breath. And then I want you to push as hard as you can into the back of the carpet with your hands. So you're externally rotating. We're basically firing up that rotator cuff. And I want to hold that for 3 or 5 breaths. So go ahead and take 3 to 5 breaths and see if you can drive that into the ground. Now you can see on Juliet's left side that her wrist is a little bit bent, and she's trying to cheat with her hands, but really we're trying to get the back of the hand, the dorsum of the hand, driving into the ground. Okay, so what we have here is a test about range of motion, but also a test of function. Can I get to this end range, this normal range, and can I have some power here? So tell it, Julie, we just rotate this feet over to that direction a little bit for me. A little bit more so I can sit above your head. Perfect. So what we're going to do here now is I want to show you how we can use some simple ideas for Juliet to make her shoulders feel better and her neck feel better. And the first one is she's going to put this ball somewhere in the rear of her shoulder. And all I'm going to have her do is roll up onto her side. In this comfortable position, she's got the ball somewhere in the rear of her shoulder, and then she's just going to push this hand to the ground. She's just going to externally rotate that hand. So what she's got is she's got this ball just right on the shoulder here, and she's just moving her tissues around. So what's great about this idea is that if I have a small ball, I can begin to have some pretty intimate conversations with my body about resolution of painful positions. Now, I'll have Juliet come back out of that for a second. Now, one of the things that when we're working on this, we want to kind of create some guidelines. And one of the guidelines is that your body should be painless to compression. So if you feel pain or discomfort when you're laying on a roller or laying on a ball, that's completely normal. It's typical. But that we're shooting for is that if I squeeze my forearm, it doesn't hurt to compression. But if I put a ball in the rear of my shoulder, it is a little bit more painful. And the idea here is that this enlightens us about areas where we might have some tissue restriction, or that we have tissues that are a little bit sensitive to compression. So what we can do here is that we can begin to integrate some concepts of breath and nervous system into Juliet feeling better so that she can make her shoulder feel better. So if she just puts this right on the river's shoulder, she rolls up on the side, the first thing that we can start to do for her is just say, hey, let's make sure that we're working at I'll hold your head up. Let's make sure that we're working at a position where you can take a full breath. So the first order of business is, can I take a full breath while I'm mobilizing? If you can't take a full breath, adjust the position or unload that tissue a little bit so it's a little bit more comfortable. The second thing is I want to be able to create a muscle contraction over that. So can she have control? So you notice that she's driving her hand into the ground, but she's also contracting in there. So pause for a second and just flex the muscle over the ball. So she can breathe and she can flex the muscle. That is our sort of guidelines for making sure we're not working too deep and we're working at an appropriate level. Now, what we're going to do here is if Juliet found an ugly spot or a sensitive spot on any part of her body, in this situation, she was working on the back of her shoulder, what she can then do is take a big breath in, contract on the ball for 4 seconds, and then relax and try to soften over that ball. So we take a big 4-second inhale, we contract for 4 seconds, and we relax for 8 seconds. We can do that over any part of her body that's sore. We can use that same idea of creating this isometric, this contraction, holding our breath, and then relaxing and breathing out. And we can begin to signal to the brain we're comfortable. Now, Juliet just rolled her shoulder for literally a minute, but what we can do is test again. Now, remember, this is oftentimes a conversation about pain, but ultimately we're into a sort of a greater conversation about how do we improve performance? How do we upregulate the body? So putting a ball into some of these areas, and we've got about 15 to 20 mobilizations in the book, it's a simple way for you to bring some awareness in. Now, if Juliet goes back to our test position, what we can do is say, hey, can you measure this? We could measure this with a sort of dynamometer, but I'm going to see if Juliet can subjectively create more force. Big breath in. She put a little input into the river shoulder. Can you push harder into the ground?
Yes.
Yes, of course. That makes sense. When we give input to the body, when we restore what the body is able to do, we see improvements in this position. You want to come sit up? Yeah. So again, let me just reiterate what we're talking about. Notice that we all started by sitting on the ground. Juliet said that, hey, I looked over and there was a ball. So she could begin a conversation about, hey, my calves are a little bit tight today. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, hey, we can begin to conjoin the sort of demands of the day, the stresses of the day with a little bit of self-massage. And we don't have to, Juliet hinted at, cover the whole body. 5 minutes on the left calf, 5 minutes on the right calf. We'll get the rest of it tomorrow. But again, the same principles apply. Juliet is scanning the area. She finds something that feels sensitive or is uncomfortable to compression. She takes a big breath in. She contracts over the ball for 4 seconds. And then she relaxes for 8 seconds, 4, 4, 8. And we try to begin to see change. And what's amazing is that if you start to apply this simple rule, this simple technique, and then think about this crucial concept that we call upstream, downstream, you can begin to untangle seemingly very complex problems in your body. So if Juliet has knee pain and she's at home, she can ask herself, well, what's below my knee? Well, it turns out her calf is below her knee, or what we call downstream. The shin is below the knee. That's downstream. Upstream of the knee are her quadriceps. So she can use this same technique, exploring, scanning her body parts, hamstrings, quads upstream, calves, shin downstream. Put a little bit of 5 minutes in, work on the other side, see if that doesn't change how your brain is interpreting what's going on. We find that myofascial release, myofascial mobilization, soft tissue mobilization to be one of the safest, easiest ways for people to self-soothe. And you're doing this in your home. You're already sitting on the ground. It's not one more thing you need to get done in order to make yourself feel better. And when we rinse and wash and repeat this simple idea, am I working at a pressure where I can take a breath? Am I working at a pressure where I can still contract and have control? Yes. If I find something that feels painful or uncomfortable with compression, I take a 4-second inhale, a 4-second contract, an 8-second relax, and I can work on that system for 5 minutes until I do the other side, and I'll get the rest of it tomorrow.
So should we take some questions?
Yeah, let's take some questions.
All right, so we do have a few questions coming in. This is gonna, well, here, let me start here because this is a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about. Have you found that some of these vital signs that you talk about, such as walking, or like you just mentioned, using the ball to relieve muscle tension, help alleviate moments of stress as well? Do you think, in a sense, these practices support mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they 100% support mental health. Kelly alluded to this earlier, but we actually feel like, you know, people who are able to actually follow the vital signs, the practices in this book are actually going to find that they have more capacity to do more things and feel better because they are well rested. They've, fed their body well, they've interacted with their community in the form of walking and, just done some care and feeding of the body in terms of our soft tissue work. And I think all those things, again, like Kelly said, it's a systems approach. And I think that's one of the things we think is so unique about this book is, it's really the first book to say, hey, we're going to look at every single system here because it is a system. Everything is connected. All of these behaviors are connected and one does not happen, without the other. And we think that it will have a huge impact on mental health.
Oftentimes when we're coming in with complex solutions, either psycho-emotional solutions, behavioral solutions, we're doing so on a lot of dirty data. And the dirty data is how I live my life day to day. So if you're coming to me with back pain or you're coming to me stressed, we're going to talk about your sleep. We're going to talk about your nutrition. We're going to talk about your movement. We're going to talk about the ways that you can self-soothe that are sort of not bourbon driven. And lo and behold, when we get people to start to improve, again, we don't have to master, but improve these aspects of their life, what we find is that the brain is a lot less twitchy and that people feel a lot more comfortable. They feel better in their bodies. As Juliet said, they sleep a little bit better. They're a little bit more relaxed. But what ends up happening is that as we become more stressed, universally, the pattern is that all of these behaviors start to go out the window. I move less. I don't take care of my body. My nutrition goes away. My sleep starts to be truncated. And what we have is a system that becomes a lot more sensitive to stress. So earlier we said, hey, one of the things that we're trying to do with these high performance environments is say it is impossible for us to outwork the competition. What we can do is adapt better than the competition. So everyone's working hard, but we can try to reduce the cost of that adaptation of those big loads. Instead of Super Bowl, think deadline at work. Instead of gold medal, think, hey, I have a sick family member I'm caring for. These are the same stressors and your brain recognizes them as the same. So when we begin to apply these physical behaviors, the things that we've traditionally thought of as sort of cerebral, people are often shocked. Then when we start to layer in other sort of stress reduction techniques and specific ideas that are sort of pinpoint to my individual problems, we have much better results.
The other thing is we've been working with athletes for most of our lives, and one of the big drivers of or one of the big challenges we've seen in our athletic population is when athletes get injured or can no longer do the things they want to do physically. Like I mentioned before, their hallway starts getting a lot smaller. What we see in those situations is the athletes we know are, first of all, removed from their community because often their community and the thing they love centers around the physical activity they're doing, going to the gym, riding their bike, connecting with friends around physical activity. And, and then also they're told that they can't do the thing they love, which is also often very connected to their mental health. And so that's why, again, we recommend, working on these practices and, focusing on the care and feeding of the body, because we really do think ultimately it's such a driver of positive mental health.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. I love that there's this self-care component to all of this.
And
I'm sure
that if it doesn't happen in our household, it's probably not going to happen. We've really come to believe that the household is the functional unit of change in society.
yes. I am sure that you get this question, or maybe pushback a lot, but we have somebody saying, what do you say for someone that has a very sedentary job that says, listen, I just don't have the time. I don't have the time to get up and move. Like, what do you say to those people, that claim that there's no movement break time in their day?
For starters, let's say that there are times in a lot of the jobs of the people we work with. If you're a fighter pilot, you just have very few choices. If you have to be at a command desk and you're
a bus driver.
I mean, you just can't move.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is we can start to think of that as session cost. My job requires a certain set of behaviors in my body that I can't negotiate. I can't. Maybe it's I'm able to stand up at my desk and squeeze my butt and take a breath. That's okay. Maybe it's I change my chair So, or I change my work environment so that I have the option to move a little bit more. So I am now at a bar stool height and I'm able to sit, perch, stand, move. If I don't have that agency, can I sit near the edge of my chair and do a lot more fidgeting? But more importantly, no one is working 24 hours a day. So in those situations, what we find is that it's more important that, hey, right after breakfast, I'm just going to get a little walk in. I'm going to control what I can control. And then maybe right after work and then before in the evening, I can do a little bit more movement. And notice that this book and the things that Juliet and I are talking about is not, let's change your diet and restrict it so that you can lose weight. We talk about fueling the diet, fueling the body with all the things it needs. But also, this is not a book about exercise. We think exercise is a wonderful extracurricular, but in the situation where we have sedentary people, if we don't say, hey, look, it's really not about can you get more exercise, it's about can we get more total movement in, suddenly you have a lot more agency and control during your day to just move more, even if it's just getting up and down off the ground in the evening.
And I do think Kelly makes a really good point there that, you know, fidgeting and moving around at your desk does qualify as non-exercise activity. I think the concern is bouts of marathon sitting where you aren't moving at all. So, you know, Kelly makes a very good point that you can just sit in your chair a little differently, make sure you're moving. You know, a lot of people we know who have sedentary jobs and don't have an option to not sit, set an alarm every 30 minutes and just stand up in front of their desk and move a little bit. Any kind of extra movement helps. It's the goal is just to not do marathon bouts of sitting where you don't move your body at all. You know, even just getting up and walking to the bathroom or, you know, taking your trash across to the other side of the building, any little movements really does add up in the long run. And then again, I think Kelly's right. You know, if you do have a sedentary job, then, you know, the onus is a little bit upon you to actually spend that time when you are in front of your TV to sort of try to work to manage that session cost of sitting with, you know, sitting on the ground, doing some soft tissue mobilization and just, you know, sort of try to undo some of the impacts of long sitting.
And remember that it's not movement is one component. The other components are what's my range of motion? How do my tissues work? Can I control my sleep? So there'll be times in your life where you have very little agency. Don't panic. If you've ever had a baby, chances are you didn't sleep for like a year. So the idea here is let's go ahead and give you some control where you can have some control. And remember that you're a robust human being. But really, if we extrapolate this out for many, many years, it turns out to be less effective. One of the questions from Joey says, do you have any morning routines or movements that help you to prep your body? Mm-hmm. We have something that we call the hip spin up and the shoulder spin up. And if you Google the ready state hip spin up, ready state shoulder spin up, you can see. Or
ready state morning routine.
Morning routine, there you go. What you can see there is that we have a sort of a scaled down version of this in the book. But ultimately what we've got inside here is a simple sort of modern sun salutation that takes your joints and takes your tissues into some full ranges and has you do some exposure so that later on in the day, it's a lot easier to get up and going. What we recognize is that if we can just get people moving a little bit, have a cup of coffee, touch some positions, get into a squat, open up your hips, what we find later on is that we don't have to do this much elaborate warming up to get into our sports or activities.
And I think that brings up a very good point that this person asked. You know, we personally prefer to do our soft tissue work in front of the TV at home at night. That works the best for us in terms of our life and our timing. We love to watch Netflix and we find that it helps us fall asleep more. But I mean, sky is the limit. You know, if you've got 10, 20, 30 minutes in the morning to spend a little time working on your body, like that's great. It doesn't matter when you do it. You know, I often actually sometimes run out of time, but I will have 5 minutes at the end of my training session. I do it there. So really, whenever you can get this in is great. We just happen to personally prefer doing it evening and find that we're the most compliant if we do it while we're watching TV.
Now, what you might think though, you know, and what's key about this is that again, we can ask, what are the positions my body should own? How should I effortlessly? We just were on an airplane and I saw a gentleman in his 80s who could not put his arms up above his face. And there's no reason that that has to happen, except he went through decades where he regularly wasn't putting his arms up. And if you've ever done a movement like Pilates or you've jumped into a yoga class, the yogis spend a lot of time in downward dog for a specific reason. And it's one of the reasons why we highlight this overhead position. If we're not regularly there, it's one of the things that ends up impacting our ability to breathe, our ability to turn our heads, ability to have functional shoulders. So really, up to you, when do you think you can fit this in? How can we have some of these tissue exposures at the very least, even if I don't get a chance to flex them?
Got
Other
it.
question?
Yeah, so no, we have some good questions. And this will go, I think, into another vital sign from the book. I know I need to work on my balance more, but I don't really know where to start as far as my daily life goes. So it sounds like this person maybe does it in their fitness training a little bit, but how do we incorporate that balance training into daily life and little bouts like you've been talking about?
Sure, I'll start. You know, I agree with you. I mean, that I probably do a little bit of balance training as part of my normal exercise, but there's no way that I'm going to sign up for a 1 hour balance class and get in the car and drive and go to my balance class. And I assume that most people are the same. And so what we figured out how to do is to incorporate these little teeny balance practices into our everyday lives. One of them is a test called the Old Man Balance Test, which was developed by our friend Chris Hinshaw. And the test involves just putting your shoes and socks in front of you in the morning and actually standing on one foot and reaching down and picking up one sock, and then putting that on with your foot still in the air, reaching down and getting your other shoe and putting that shoe on and tying it, and then switching and doing it to the other side. It's first of all, a great test of your overall balance, but it's something that you can do every day. It's actually how I put my shoes and socks on every single day. And I've gotten really fast and good at it. In fact, I can crush Kelly at the Old Man Balance Test. I can crush him. So that's one of the things we do. You know, the other test that you'll see in the book is called the Solek test, which stands for standing on one leg, eyes closed. And Kelly can talk a little bit about why the eyes closed thing is so key, but I actually do the Solek test every morning and night while I'm brushing my teeth, because those are things I'm doing always anyway. And so I actually spend 20 seconds or more like actually more like a minute per side, standing on one leg, brushing my teeth, practicing my balance. And then the final thing I'll say about how we fit it into our lives is, you know, we actually have a bunch of balance tools around our house. Again, back to the peppering concept I mentioned earlier. We love a tool called the Slack Block. It's like a little foam with a piece of wood on top, and I keep one by my desk so I can actually practice a little bit of balance throughout my day. We've got some balance boards in the garage that our kids love to play with. So we've tried to sort of pepper our environment with some tools that make it easy to practice balance. And the other thing about those tools is they're fun. You know, we haven't had a chance to talk about this, but one of the things that's gotten lost, I think, in the larger fitness conversation is, you know, the sort of role of play in all of this, and we want this to be fun. And, you know, that's the other thing about a lot of these tests is that they're actually fun to do and practice, and they're fun to do with your family and your kids. And so I definitely recommend trying both the Old Man Balance Test and the Solek test, and if incorporating them into your daily life.
If we just got everyone to become balance aware and got our families thinking about balance, we just saw that hip fractures are going to double by 2050. We know that falling and fracturing your hip is actually the #1 sort of driver of early death, because we lose that ability to move, we lose so much of our muscle mass. So if we can work on this, and one of the reasons we have an active balance test and we have a test with our eyes closed is that a lot of our balance is usually tied to our sight. It's some aspect of the system, but when we remove that, we should still have balance principles. And it's why people fall in big crowded movements. When a lot of people are walking, they lose the horizon and fall. It's why we see fall risk in the elderly increase in places where there's a lot of snow and they lose depth of field, and why a lot of people fall in the night. So it's an easy way to sort of turn your brain on and say, hey, we need to work on this. And if you're an exerciser, go ahead and just do some of your first sets of warm up with the squat. Grab a barbell, hinge, do a little overhead pressing on one leg, try the seesaw press. It's really easy to start to work on this one-legged position. And what I'll tell you is that if you've ever gone to a yoga class, you spend a lot of time standing on one foot, and this is one of the reasons we're trying to drive that change. So what we remember, we've had this benefit of looking around and seeing what best practices are. And again, if we can reduce fall risk and improve people's balance, we improve their running, we improve their foot strength, we decrease their foot pain, and lo and behold, they move better in their environments. So if you've got foot pain, start working on your balance.
I love that. Thank you. All right. I think we have time for one more question here. And I think this is a good one to end on. You mentioned the 10-10 at 10 workout. You know, what would you leave people here tonight going to do, you know, if they only have 5-10 minutes to get in some exercises? Are there some key exercises other than those 3 that you mentioned that you kind of tend to gravitate towards and tend to be good for overall body wellness?
Well, I'd say it's, people often ask us this question. It's hard for us to pick one thing. But I mean, I think in connection with this talk, especially since everybody's hearing this tonight, I mean, I think if we could just, prescribe everyone the homework of sitting on the floor for 30 minutes after this talk tonight, I think that would go a long way towards, people getting some input into their hips and their hip range of motion. And
But
what would you add?
let me just say this. One of our friends, and we reference this as we finish the book, Dave Spitz is an Olympian and Olympic coach, is that he has this concept called never do nothing. So if you only had 5 minutes, it's easy to say, hey, this 5 minutes isn't useful. I'll go do something else. Instead of, hey, I'm going to explore my squat. I'm going to get up and down off the ground. I'm going to explore my push-up. Can I hang from a bar and work on my pull-ups?
Yeah,
You can actually
I'm going to walk to the corner and back.
Absolutely. Doing some breath holds. There's so much work to be done in 5 minutes. And if we just started to layer in those 5 minutes and see them as opportunities to move and to explore and to play, you'd be shocked. If you just spent 5 minutes practicing standing on one leg, you'll be blown away that all of those inputs count. Never do nothing.
I love that. That is such a good motto to live by and to end on tonight. Kelly and Juliet, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening. I have the book here, Built to Move. It's fantastic. My whole background is fitness and exercise, and I just loved it and ate up every moment and thought it was really entertaining. The first story right at the beginning, on how you two met just pulls you right in and gets you connected. So I sent out the podcast in the chat and the link to the book. I hope that everybody took some key pointers away with them today. And thank you so much, everybody. Like I said, Spark Your Health. We have some amazing events coming up. We've got Posture with Aisha Tahir next week. And I hope everybody takes these practices and goes to try to put on their shoes on just one leg. All right. Stay well, everyone. Have a good night.